It's Good Morning Nigeria, live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, before we begin our conversation on financing Safe School Initiative, let's listen into this background put together by correspondent Musa Abubakar.
12-year-old Hamis Awal and his friends are amongst the long list of out-of-school children in Nigeria. A problem made worse with abductions of school children, insecurity, and now COVID-19 pandemic. Consequently, an estimated 13 million out-of-school children roam the streets in the country.
Pulling together this compact under your leadership.
This gathering of policymakers and implementers are, however, seeking to change all these. More financing and multi-sectorial strategies to implement safe school declaration in a bid to make schools safe for children to return to and build confidence in the education system. Top discussions here.
We have all committed today through a compact that will invest more in education to be able to provide our children the right type of education in the right, secure and safe environment.
At the Nigerian Governors Forum, we are committed to working with other partners to ensure that we keep our schools safe.
Investment in our schools, investment in our education is actually an investment in security and defense.
A cross-sectorial working group will take recommendations and actions forward at the end of the deliberations.
All right, well, thank you for staying with us. I would like to thank Musa for that background report. Now, let me begin by introducing guests who are already seated here in the studio. And first, I'd like to welcome Chukwuemeka Nwajuba. Chukwuemeka Nwajuba is the Minister of State for Education. Thank you, sir, for coming here.
Good morning, Nigerians, and good morning, everyone.
All right, also with us in the studio here is Asue Igodalo, Chairman, Nigerian Economic Summit Group. He is the Chairman, Sterling Bank, and Director, Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, NTA. It's a pleasure to have you this morning.
Thank you for inviting me. Good morning, Nigerians.
All right, and we also have Mariam Uwais. Mariam Uwais is Special Advisor to the President on Social Investments. Madam, good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Nigerians.
All right, Kinsley.
All right, a pleasure to have you three guests with us this morning. We hopefully will be joined by one or two governors via Zoom in the course of today's conversation. But let's begin straight away with the guests that we have with us here in the Abuja studios. First, the Honorable Minister of State for Education, Dr. Chukwuemeka Nwajuba. Honorable Minister, tell us, I mean, just by way of a reminder, we know that after the abductions in Chibok in 2014, there was a rave about making the school environment safe and secure so that the ends of education are not defeated by the terrorists. But after that, there appears to have been a lull, which of course is the immediate background to the meeting that was held on Tuesday this week. But what is the Safe School Initiative all about, and how come 7 years later it appears not to have gained much traction?
Well, thank you very much, Yesley. As you are aware, the Safe School Initiative was conceived after the Chibok kidnap, and Nigeria proceeded to utilize the funds that were raised at the time to do exactly what the fund at the time was intended for. We felt that some schools were not safe and there was a need to move some of the students around. After Chibok, there was Buni Yaji, and that's caused a lot of consternation around the area. So what we did, we relocated all the students around the 43 federal government colleges in the north of the country, and that money was used in, actually paying their fees, getting them up to, and they've transited for over 6 years. Most of them who were in JS1 at the time probably are just exiting, as you may imagine. So the funds were used. The challenges at the time were novel, but they've evolved. Security threat around the country has also taken some different sort of shape. Then there was a concentration in the northeast, occasioned primarily by Boko Haram and their own style of insurgents. It has escalated somewhat because it morphed. The security threats had then moved from just the northeast, and now we have them in the northwest, some parts of the northwest. Now we're dealing with banditry that would not necessarily Boko Haram. There might be elements that are mixed in them, but now there is no longer just targeted kidnapping. There's this mass abduction, and then the street, we're looking at it. So when I'm sure when you will hear from governors specifically for their, because we are asking governors to do threat analysis for each of the schools, depending on the kind of school they are. We found out that the mass abductions are concentrated mainly around secondary schools for people who are within an age bracket for which there is some ransom value, most especially girls, because they put a lot of more pressure on the society if they are girls, and the value of kidnap value is also higher. So the security apparatus in the country is looking at it holistically. So while the Safe School Initiative was conceived first to react to what was at the time an intermittent abduction of key students, and we felt that looking at the school environment, some were not fenced, some were not adequately manned, that the right thing to do at the time was to relocate them, put money behind making sure that students were then going to school, transporting from far distances, relocating them to places where we thought were safer. That had been contained. That money was judiciously used. The Ministry of Education oversaw that and made sure that it was good. What this is a response to the escalation. Because while that fund seemed to go into hibernation, what has happened since then is that there's an occasioned escalation which has now evolved a new approach to financing it. And that is what the Ministry of Finance convened all stakeholders, the security agencies, because it's not just no longer an educational issue. It is now a wider societal issue in the sense that if the society itself is not safe, then it's impossible to get just one micro school to be safe within that unsafe climate. And that is why the Economic Summit Group, I believe, have been invited to please help with not just examining how much money everybody needs to do this, but also examining some of the technical content around what needs to be done. Because it's not just enough to throw money at it. They also need to see what technologies that are available. We are looking at this, like you will see, as a social response within the country, but it's a bit larger than that because it has a wider economic implication, as they will speak to, and the governors may also explain. So that's what the convergence of what happened and what we are now. That's where we are.
Yes, Honorable Minister of State is still with you. You know, when we talk about a safe school, as rightly pointed out, there are so many issues involved. The ones you mentioned with respect to relocating so students of federal secondary schools to safer schools is one. Then there are state schools. There are also private schools that are also in that part of the country. Now, we are looking at this from the point of view of really the geography of a school. How can it be protected? Apart from the ones you mentioned, which is, of course, realistic, as you mentioned, in terms of the money that we are made available to do that, this time around it has escalated. And what we'll find in this country today is abduction, you know. And in terms of abduction, many students are involved in that. And because there is no particular protection of the environment, the bandits have their way. So is there any operational framework that has been put in place by this administration, you know, to ensure that these schools, even the schools where you have, you know, converged others to, are protected?
Well, again, thank you, and I'm sure when the rest of people speak, you'll hear from part of what the summit did in the one day was to analyze this. Governors had already sat. They're all state-specific. Overall, as a country, we have nearly 153,000 primary schools around the country. The country is a huge country, geospatially. In some areas, they are more spaciously located, like in Niger State, for instance. It's a very huge state, and some are very, very far from each other. In some states, they are compact. Lagos State, for instance. So all of that states, they are going to be specific. The main thing we found out, most of them, originally schools weren't conceived as fenced-in places. They were supposed to be a place of joy and place, an open place. So the idea of fencing them, especially in the north, where some of the schools are pretty large, weren't conceived. So those are the new responses that states are going. In places like Sokoto, for instance, they've already gone ahead and started fencing schools. So those are specific responses. But like I did point out, we have in Nigeria today what we call Grade 3. Grade 3 is domiciled at the Ministry of Planning. It is a geo-reference network that then, in conjunction with UBEC, because when UBEC did the national audit of schools, whether our nearly 28,000 secondary schools, which are the most at threat, some of them, like you pointed out, are not federal government colleges. Federal government colleges are only 110. The rest belong to religious bodies, state governments, and private individuals. So the ownership structure is a bit varied. However, we do require that all of us examine each of them in the context of what makes that school safe. For us at the Ministry of Education, there are 4 ambits to being safe. Safe in the classroom. The child, what is he learning? What is he doing? What is it available to him? What is it available that he can do? The school environment. Who comes into the school environment? What's the quality of the teacher? The people who work there? Are they people who can be trusted? Are they people who you can work with? The immediate outside environment, which is what governs who interacts with the school, the parent, those who mix with it. And then finally, the larger society, which is where everything else crops up from. So in examining a safe school environment and making it conducive for learning, all of these interact. If you don't have qualified teachers, for instance, that school is still unsafe. If you don't have people who are actually responsive in the environment, their school is unsafe. If you don't have boots on the ground, security men, people who work there, those who report, children are children. And at most times, and oftentimes, I just came back from Kefi last night, where fire gutted a school compound because electrical wiring was faulty. That's an unsafe environment. We lost a girl, and we've been almost crying over that. But everything needs to come together to be a safe place. And that is what this challenge actually is about. And the work that we're doing is all state governors have agreed. They are doing school-specific analysis. And for Kaduna State, when he gave a report on the 500 secondary schools in the place, those who do not have fences, those who do not have adequate facilities, those who do not have men on ground, the Nigerian Civil Defense, through the Ministry of Interior, the Ministry of Interior presented a graphic of almost the 17,000 schools that are already manned by civil defense, and those 62,000 others that do not have the presence. All of that is available. The security conundrum over the country, the Chief of Defense Staff was also available at the place, and we spoke, and we understand what needs to be done across the country, what the funding and the gaps that are then needed to stem that will be the area of our big boys, those who have the money.
Okay. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister of State for Education. We're not bringing in Mr. Aswa Ighodalo just yet. Let's talk around the issues so that we would know how much it's likely to cost us, and then he will tell us whether that's a realistic objective to pursue. Their pockets are usually very deep, but they're also very conservative because they have to be sure what they are spending money on. Earlier, we indicated that we'll be joined by 1 or 2 governors for this conversation. We understand our Zoom connection to the governor of Kaduna State is okay now. You can see him there on the right side of your screen. His Excellency Nasiru El-Rufai. Pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria today.
Thank you for inviting me. Good morning, Nigerians. I'm happy to be here.
All right. I believe this is the first time we're having you on Good Morning Nigeria. Kieran, I believe so.
Yeah, but actually,
right. Yeah,
we're just happy to have you
that's right.
as our guest.
Yeah, so it's a pleasure having you. But on the Safe School initiative, which of course, following from the explanation by the Honorable Minister of State, is now much more elaborate than was earlier conceived for the Northeast. Give us a sense of your understanding of the scope of the current look at the safe school idea on the heels, of course, of what has been happening, and your state, unfortunately, has been heavily impacted by the activities of these bandits and kidnappers for ransom.
Yes, well, initially the Safe School initiative was targeted at protecting schools in the Northeast because of the activities of Boko Haram. Unfortunately, the problem of abduction of students is now more of a Northwestern and North Central phenomenon. And the most states affected are Zamfara, Katsina, Kaduna, and Niger. I think the initiative is still relevant. I think it needs to be revived and applied across Northwest and North Central, in addition to the Northeast. We've had cases of abductions here in Kaduna State. The new phenomenon now is the abduction of nurses and medical personnel, ostensibly to treat bandits that have been wounded. A few days ago, one of our rural hospitals was attacked and 2 nurses were abducted. So we need to look at not just safe schools, but also safe primary health centers, because we have many of these in rural areas, and they are now increasingly being targeted by the bandits. In Kaduna State, we have about 500 schools. We mapped them on their levels of vulnerability and identified about 40 that we thought were vulnerable. We closed down some. We closed down, I think, about 10, and redistributed the students into safer schools. And so far, none of our students in any of these protected schools have been abducted. But there are other schools that are vulnerable. A private university was attacked a few days ago here in our state. And many of the private schools that we mapped, we considered them unsafe. We advised them to close down. Some did, some said they had special security arrangements. But I think we need this initiative more now than ever. Most of our schools, I said, are not fenced. Basic things like fencing to protect the students from easy access by the bandits is a problem. We need more security men. We need to have soldiers that can respond within 30 minutes of any threat. So I think this is what we need to recalibrate the Safe School initiatives to take into account these emerging threats and the new modus operandi of these terrorists. Thank you.
All right, Your Excellency, let's still remain with you. When we talk about the Safe School initiative, the Honorable Minister of State for Education highlighted, most of the areas that are required to be safe before you can say that the school is fully safe. But one thing that is very important is the aspect of financing, right, which of course has become very, very critical. Now, how are you financing or sourcing finance, for the Safe School initiative for Kaduna State, for instance? As Kinsley mentioned earlier, unfortunately, Kaduna has been hit, for some time now, by kidnappers and, of course, bandits. And again, what are you discussing with other governors in that part of the country with respect to a collective financing of Safe School initiative in that area?
Well, look, finance is a major problem. In Kaduna State, we have been using our budget to implement these safety measures. It has been very burdensome on us. We've had to cut back on other things, like building more classrooms and so on. We have to first make the school safe because we can build more classrooms. Indeed, there are parts of Kaduna State, like Birnungwari local government, where we've awarded contracts for the construction of more classrooms and hostels, and the contractors cannot mobilize because the entire area is considered unsafe. So I agree with the minister, the schools cannot be safe if the rest of the country is not safe. But in the case of schools and students, because of their specific vulnerability, we've had to take extraordinary measures. So how are we financing this in Kaduna State? We are relying on our budget. our revenues from the federal government, the federation account allocations, as well as our internally generated revenue, which unfortunately, because of the situation that we are facing, have been going down. So, we need help. We have met as Northwest governors. Even yesterday, we met as Northwest and North Central governors with the president to put these issues on the table of the need to secure our schools and public facilities in our region from the bandits, as well as, solve the problem holistically, not just protecting schools, but protecting entire communities and the entire society. We need help. We need private sector support. We need interventions from bilateral and multilateral partners because we cannot do it alone. Kaduna State has 500 secondary schools. We have over 4,000 primary schools, and all these are vulnerable. We have 1,068 primary health centers. Most of them are in rural areas. They are vulnerable. We have 46,000 square kilometers of land mass, and about a third of that has been the target of bandits. So it's a large-scale problem, and it can only be solved with partnership and collaborations, as well as thinking through and bringing up innovative solutions to this emerging problem.
Let me just ask you this one question before we bring in the other guests again. Your Excellency, Governor of Kaduna State. What is your conception, or if there is a group think around this, what is the conception of the Safe School Initiative, and therefore, what are the priority items? Is it essentially one of physical security? Because I heard the Minister of State also raise the issue of qualified teachers. How that gets into the mix is something that we'll ask him to explain. But what is your conception of it? Is it physical security, which on its own is elaborate enough, or does it admit of other priority items? And if so, what are they?
Well, look, I think the major problem now is physical security, okay? Of course, having quality teachers is important, but I think that is a second level problem that the state governments can solve. We have solved it in Kaduna. We administered competency tests to teachers, and we fired 22,000 of them and replaced them with 25,000 new qualified teachers. That can be done by the states. It doesn't require any special intervention of the federal government or private sector partners or the international community. It requires political will. It requires a decision to put the interests of pupils ahead of the interest of politicians and other self-seeking groups. In our view, here in Kaduna, at least for most of the Northwest, the Safe Schools Initiative should address at least three issues. Okay, the first is to ensure that schools are fenced. Schools are physically safe, because unless you fence schools, you give easy access to criminals. Unless you fence schools, you lose land to encroachers. So fencing schools is very, very important, and that is a budgetary item. It's a simple thing to do. You can fence schools, but you need money to do so, and schools occupy large expanses of land, particularly here in the north, where we have large amounts of land, and we take large amounts of land because we project future growth of the need of these schools. Okay, so that's one. The second is to have enough boots on the ground, security in the school. We must have more civil defense, more private security guards, more vigilance service people in the school. We should have many people in the schools. We should have watchtowers in schools built so that any threat approaching can be seen in good time so that you can call for help. The third component is to look at schools and ensure that they are located not further than 30 minutes from a military installation. Because what we are facing with these bandits is beyond the capacity of civil defense or the police to deal with. We need the Army, you need the Air Force, you need the Navy Special Forces close by. And we have looked at the patterns of abductions in Katsina and Zamfara, and we have come to the conclusion, along with the armed forces, that if the Army or the Air Force Special Forces or the Navy Special Forces can get to a location of a school within 30 minutes, the abductions can be foiled. Okay? They need to get there 30 minutes from the first time the school calls and says we are being attacked. If they can get there within 30 minutes, often you can foil the abduction. So we need to ensure that there are forward operating bases or detachments of the Army or the Air Force Special Forces or the Navy Special Forces within 30 minutes of every major school. If we're able to achieve these three, we'll be able to put a cap on the success of the bandits in kidnapping our students. And then the other softer issues can be addressed, I think.
All right. From what he has explained, if we should have, military bases, perhaps 30 minutes before you get to a particular school, it means that Kaduna, for instance, that has 500 secondary schools and 4,000 primary schools. One wonders, the possibility of having the number of military personnel, that would be.
Let me correct this impression, okay? Another thing that we have noticed is that these bandits attack rural schools, okay? They do not come into urban locations and attack because they can't get out. So they attack rural schools. They often operate at night, and they prefer boarding schools. So that significantly reduces the number of schools you have to protect. And in most of the urban areas, you don't have to bother. It is the rural areas that are more at risk. I know that we have cases like the Federal College of Mechanization, which is within the Kaduna metropolis, but a little bit detached away, on the way to the airport, that was attacked. We didn't even consider that an unsafe school, frankly. But the number of bases that you need are not that many, because the focus is to situate the bases within 30 minutes of a cluster of rural schools, and that can be done. It can be done. In the case of Kaduna State, we have been able to more or less achieve that. We have not been able to have, the bandits have not succeeded in abducting any students from any of our secondary schools, because we have done this mapping and we've placed the security agencies there. But the problem with this banditry is that it evolves. For instance, we did not think that primary health centers are also at risk. But 2 days ago, one of our primary health centers was attacked and 2 nurses were abducted. We are still trying to understand the pattern of that and craft an appropriate response. But I think it's important to make this explanation so that the problem does not appear overwhelming. It is not. It can be done.
Thank you, the Governor of Kaduna State, Nasir El-Rufai. We'll get back to you in the course of the conversation. Now we are back to the studio here, where we have Asue Iwodalo and others. Asue Iwodalo is the chairman, Nigerian Economic Summit Group. He's also chairman, Sterling Bank, and director, Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority. Sir, finance is critical to the successful implementation of a Safe School initiative. And what should be the role of the banking sector in this? And how does this role, impact on this initiative? And what should be the methodology of, accessing funds from the banking sector to, of course, implement the Safe School initiative?
Thank you very much. Let's limit it to the banking sector. Let's look at all sectors. Let's look at the private sector. Let's look at international donors. Let's look at NGOs and civil society and even the ordinary man. I think everybody should contribute to this initiative. It's a major problem in the country, this issue of safe schools and security nationwide. So I think it's something that everybody, so we shouldn't limit it to the banks or to just the private sector. We should encourage all contributors to a fund of financing safe schools. And we heard the Honorable Minister and the Governor speak about the initiatives and what financing is required for as regards keeping our schools safe and keeping our students safe. So, but I think the critical thing is to have a structure that's transparent and trusted, and an appropriation process that's transparent. So if we all know that we have a structure for gathering and keeping funds that's transparent, we know how the money is kept, we know how the money will be spent, and we know those in charge of the money, it's easier for you to encourage people to contribute into a fund that will then subvent and support budgetary allocations that government is providing. So that's the key thing. I think everybody, not just the private sector or the banks, will feel very comfortable when they know that they're contributing to something and that money will be used for what they contributed it for. So that's key. So for us, it's the structure. Some states have, for instance, set up special security trust funds. I know that Lagos State has one, headed by a private sector person. Edo State has one, and a few other states. And they've created a structure which is like a fund and a board. And members of the board are people trusted who have pedigree, and it's easy for them to attract third-party funding. And that money is then appropriated for specific purposes, buying equipment, buying vehicles, securing and providing technology for security. So people know how the money is spent, people know how the money is kept, and there's an accounting process that's done.
Should there be a central structure or different structures, perhaps state by state? Because to deal with this, of course, you talked about, sincerity of purpose and ensuring that there's accountability. Would you prefer to have a central structure, perhaps a federal structure for this purpose?
Because of donor fatigue, there are many pressures on people's resources. Particularly, we've had the COVID, we've had COVID, we've had floods, we had different things. Because of donor fatigue, I'd suggest that we have a global, like a federal structure that then intervenes, because it's not every state that has the same peculiar problems. There are certain areas that are more affected than others. And so we would probably have a federal structure, and we would, with the collaboration of Finance Ministry, Education Ministry, Security Services, identify the areas that require the most support, and then channel those funds to those areas. Bringing in technology, and it's not just funding that the private sector can bring. I was talking to Mrs. Uweza, the Honorable Minister, before we started the program, and there are different areas. There's technology, encouraging investments in technology by many companies. Recently, I heard about a company in Ibadan that's developing drones that are that can read carbon emissions. So if those drones fly over forests, they know that there's a lot more there are a lot more humans in this forest than should be. So they can easily program, identify, and then tell security centers that there's something happening here that's unusual. So there's also encouraging research, encouraging technology, supporting schools by training teachers and encouraging the training of teachers. So there are different ramifications to this, and there are different ramifications to safe schools. But straight to your question, I think if we have a center, well-administered center, that's concentrating on looking at the areas that need the most support, and then targeting support to those areas, I think that will work better. And that will ensure and concentrate donors into one area, and we don't have multi points for donating, which also affects and irritates the private sector sometimes, So it's key to have one source, Yeah. Thank you.
All right, that's what you would thank you very much there. It's made the point that financing or contribution towards financing the Safe School Initiative could be in cash or in kind. We will drill into some of those aspects subsequently in the course of the conversation. Let's now bring in the Special Advisor to the President on Social Investment, Mrs. Miriam Uwais. Mrs. Uwais, you've listened to the other contributors. This is one area that you've also had to handle. Tell us what the experience has been in terms of just trying to get around the Safe School Initiative, making a success of it, and now the existential challenges that we are facing with the ascendancy of bandits and kidnappers?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the fact that this has finally, or is being reinvigorated, because it's really critical that we address the issues that have been emerging and evolving over time. I think one of the issues that we seem to not have focused on is the mental health of the children and the parents, the communities. It's very important for us to also deploy psychologists and counselors to try and engage the parents and the communities and also the children themselves, because there's been a huge there's been an impact on the mental health of many of the parents. They would rather their children not go to school at all, which has dire consequences, especially in the areas where, I mean, if you look at where the banditry and the abductions have been happening, is already very bad in terms of the school attendance and the school completion rates. I think the Ministry of Health should also be a part of this conversation so that we're able to get also the softer areas addressed. We should also look at the drills, alarms, lighting. There are a number of things that the security agencies can do in terms of engaging the communities to know what the early warning signals are. And also to be able to, if at all this happens, to be able to track those children just in case they're taken away. So we'll need a lot of technology, as Mr. Ighodalo has said. We need maybe chips inserted in maybe wristbands or badges. There's a lot that can be done for our children, and especially in encouraging them. And also the fallback plan, of course, is how do we get learning to the children if the parents actually resist that their children should go to school? We can engage in a lot of campaigns and advocacy, but at the end of the day, I mean, even if it's happened before in the 60s, compelling parents penalizing parents whose children are not in school, that happened. I'm really worried that this is going to happen again, because it's only common sense that if you feel your child is a sitting target, it may be difficult to convince you. So how do we get learning to the homes in a situation where we have a dearth of internet in certain places, especially in these rural areas, and especially where their parents are not literate, so they're not able to engage them in classes, even on the radio. I think these are larger questions that I think the Federal Ministry of Education and the state ministries of education should be able to engage with, because we always must think about the plan B. And I must commend the governor of Kaduna State and the Governors Forum for what steps have been taken so far. It's very important, especially in a country that's a federation, with every state having its own autonomy, prioritizing what it feels is priority for them. It's important to have a minimum standard framework across the states so that we're able to share the learnings and the opportunities across board, and to see how each state can actually ensure that there's schools, the schools within their vicinity, and not just the state schools, but also school proprietors, private school proprietors, the schools that are owned by faith-based organizations. They all need to be brought onto the same platform, so that they are able to address these challenges as they emerge. You know, I've listened to it being boarding schools, secondary schools, now primary healthcare centers. What next? We need to be a bit more proactive about where else this can happen, and continue to engage with how to provide security across so many other factors. And so it comes down to really security around the country.
All right, madam. You're an advisor to the president on social investments, and one way or another, this issue falls under your purview. We're talking about investment here. And Mr. Odolo talked about the way and the method of raising funds for the implementation of this Safe School initiative. What should be the role of your office in this direction? Are you expanding your horizon or your tentacles, towards ensuring that persons or group of persons, or organizations or agencies of government could invest in this initiative?
What happened in 2014 was that a group of funders got together, including Gordon Brown, Their World, and they engaged the then Minister of Finance and Mrs. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. And they set up this fund, and they disbursed the funds, as the Honorable Minister of State for Education has said, in a very efficient manner, and they targeted the issues that were then the challenge. Now it's much broader, and it is the same Minister of Finance that has convened this meeting, and she's putting together a technical committee and a board of advisors to help her ensure that there's a policy behind the funding, or the funding behind the policy, I should say. Because without a document that actually sets out a framework of how these funds will be disbursed, what should be prioritized, how, and all of that, it won't be, and it should be a very inclusive, all the stakeholders should be brought together. Without that, the funding is really neither here nor there. I think we need to have this policy document, which is what the convening was about, how to start setting up this policy document that will direct or provide the guidelines on how the funds will be disbursed. So it's not my office, it's the Minister for Finance, Budget and National Planning that's actually handling this mandate. I'm just supporting her.
All right. Thank you very much, Mrs. Miriam Owais. Again, we'll come back to you later on in the course of the conversation. We are being joined now via Zoom by the Governor of Sokoto State, His Excellency Aminu Waziri Tambuwal. Your Excellency, a pleasure to have you join us on Good Morning Nigeria for this conversation.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Let's begin by getting your perspective on what the Safe School initiative entails with regard to Sokoto State.
Well, thank you very much once again, and I must again thank the Honorable Minister of Finance and other stakeholders for convening the conversation and discussions on this very and all important issue of safe and secure school environment for our children in Nigeria, especially given the times that we are in now, whereby the challenge of kidnapping and abduction of children, particularly school children, is on the increase in our country. In Sokoto State, we have not had any such an incident so far. We pray we shouldn't have. But given the experiences of our neighbors and other parts of the country, we've been taking measures to ensure that for studies, and we've been proactive in ensuring that we merge most of the boarding schools and left only those in the capital that are now having students in boarding houses. But we have raised the level of awareness, even in schools whereby, in environments whereby we have day schools, and we have engaged community and community leaders in this initiative of ensuring that schools are safe and secure for learning. You can see clearly that the motive of these criminal elements is to disrupt school learning process in our country, and in particular in the Northwest, where we're witnessing this trend. And we must do everything humanly possible to arrest this situation. It is important as having schools, as important as having teachers,
well, we are having audio challenge along the line of communication there with the governor of Sokoto State, Aminu Waziri Tambuwal. When the line gets better, we'll certainly return to him for further explanations. This is Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the NTA. We take a short break now. When we return, the conversation continues. Do stay with us.
All right, you're welcome back, and you're still watching Good Morning Nigeria. We, of course, lost the signals to the Sokoto State Governor. I think his bandwidth issues affected his connection to us. Once our engineers are able to sort that out, we'll bring him back into the conversation. Let's now bring in again the Honorable Minister of State for Education, Dr. Chukwuemeka Nwajuba. I'm sure that a number of stakeholders are clear on this, what I'm about to say. We are not starting at ground zero with regard to the Safe School Initiative. Now, listening to some of the steps already taken by Kaduna State, what the governor has done is to indicate that, look, some of the necessaries to ensuring safe school initiatives are matters within the competence of state governments. And he has taken some steps. But he says that the problem is huge, and therefore there is need for contribution. And the story is not necessarily uniform throughout the country or even throughout the most heavily impacted states in the north. But in addition to that, the point about not starting from ground zero is as follows. We already have intervention mechanisms. There is UBEC, for instance. And then, of course, the states have their aligned budgets for education. You have SUBEB. In some states, and I'm sure you are familiar with this, education is often seen as a gold mine. Is it possible in all of this to tweak, without running afoul of the enabling enactments, to say, look, for purposes of what we intend to do, perhaps the kind of intervention that UBEC could do will be in XYZ direction? You can take an example, for instance, from TED Fund. You can see TED Fund has been intervening in infrastructure in institutions of higher learning. Infrastructure isn't just a lecture theater. It could also involve fencing or other activities. So that, as Mr. Aswe Igodalo said, there isn't too much expectation from the private sector or other NGOs or other donors, and they don't get fatigued. Is this something that you may wish to speak on?
Well, thank you. And you've heard what most commentators already said. But look at how we refocus this. You did point out this exists. There's been a framework. That framework addressed what it was meant and conceived for at the time. We have a larger situation now that has evolved. And we think that the Ministry of Finance is correct in convening or reconvening the actors in the field. We've now then extrapolated from that conveyance. What everybody then arrived at was to say, these are the things that will be needed. These are the challenges that are peculiar, and these are the challenges that are general. The police has specified that the issue of security is not necessarily a state-based matter, or whether you give control to state governors or not, but to the community, at where these things are. They want a community policed, community response, community affected, community deployed members of the public, so that there is complete interface at the point where the schools are, or wherever installation may be, whether they be health installations, whether they be federal institutions or not. But somebody, it is located somewhere. And there has to be an aggregation of all the forces that are amassed in that area towards the safety of that institution. And we agree with that. We also agree that this police on its own, the military on their own, or even in their combined strength, are still grossly inadequate because of the huge nature of our country. Now, I don't want to delve into the security architecture of the country, and that's a broader area, and they are specialists in that field. And we've heard from the CDS, we've heard from the IGP of police, we've heard from the civil defense, we've heard. Now, the country is challenged at the moment from different fronts, whether they be people trying to free prisoners, yesterday the riots in Kanu, or anywhere. There are lots of challenges at every time. But we need to concentrate on what it is that we are looking at. These abductions, threats to learning, those who encroach upon the learning space. And this is what the special advisor to the president just pointed out, that it is not just only physical. Physical is important because that is what is happening now, and we need to address them. And the governor of Kaduna State has given the steps around those physical infrastructure. Secure them physically, have men on the ground to do that. Yeah, and in a country like Nigeria, you can use that to solve a couple of problems that can be solved with that. Myself and the Minister of Interior, we've already discussed about 1.2 million Nigerians, for instance, asked to be employed in civil defense. If we take 300,000 of those alone, we'll be solving half of the Nigerian unemployment problem. And moving them to schools, for instance, at 12 in each of our 22,000 schools, we would have solved some problems. That convergence needs to happen.
I'm not cutting you short, but there's one aspect of the question that we may have overlooked. That has to do with UBEC's intervention. Is there any need for UBEC to intervene?
I'm coming to that. I'll get to that.
Because we're running short of time.
Okay, so you're looking at what it is that needs to be done, and then going to how do you then do it? Now, once you've articulated all of these and the things that the responses, you see the federal government overlook it. They shouldn't be done in silos. Each one is talking to the other. If we need boots on the ground, that's not a responsibility for UBEC or anybody. You need civil defense or police doing that. Now, how do you fund that? Which is what the structure that the Ministry of Finance is setting up at the moment. She wants to set up a template that this is where the contribution, like he pointed out, a structure that this is what we can, when the funds are gathered, this is what they will be spent for. There's some sort of transparency. The way we work, some of us who've been in the private sector before came here, is actually, we need some transparency as to collation, use, and appropriation. Those need to be clear. Then you now ask for the agencies that can then intervene and what the ambits of their powers are. In the UBEC Act, we everything that she spoke to about even criminalizing not going to school, we already have them in the UBEC Act. When in the days of the National Assembly in 1999, we did the UBEC Act, and in 2004 it was signed. We said it should be criminal for you not to bring your children to school, and we can arrest you. But we found out that we don't even have enough jails for that anyway. So let's just move on to what is possible. And like you pointed out, in my days as chairman of TED Fund, we tweaked the law a little. My background is law, and we understand the stretches that you can make of this. What we have powers to do, in the case of tertiary education, we could alter them a little bit and ask this, because that's what the law allows. In the case of UBEC, you can't stretch them. There's a funding mechanism. The governors are at the moment saying, just give us the fund, let's just do what we're. No, the law says there has to be a counterpart funding. And that counterpart funding has been at the head of the struggle. Now, you can't unilaterally, at the Ministry of Education, because we supervise UBEC, hardly, UBEC is the commission. The Ministry of Education does not unilaterally interfere how they work. We have to also be guided by the law, because that's what governs the country, the enforcement of its laws. However, the UBEC can agree at its board to make some arrangements that can then support what it is that the Ministry of Finance is structuring. And then it becomes a pool where all of us then look at exactly if there's a contributory structure that like the chairman of the NSDG has pointed out. If that structure exists, then we can make appropriations to, let's say, Sokoto State, or let's say to Jengebi. Jengebi is at Zamfara State, and it borders very closely to Sokoto State. Sokoto State took some proactive steps, not because the problem happened in Sokoto State, but because Jengebi is at a remote end of their border. Now, Zamfara State, in the 14 local governments in Zamfara State, have to respond differently. The way you respond in Tarata Mafara is not the same way you respond in Gusau State. You move from there, you go westward, and you're heading towards Jigawa State and Kano State. Now, what does that tell you? What do you respond to? And how Kano is vast. How are you going to respond in Kano is not the way you're going to respond in Jigawa State. So those are the things we need to do.
Minister of State for Education, we thank you at this point. We're just running short of time. Of course, you have a very valid point that you are making.
I'm sorry, I have an issue. You want to go to the Kaduna State Governor?
No, I want to bring in Iwodalo.
Before we bring in Iwodalo, there's a point that the Honorable Minister of State made. Let's get some additional practical information from the Kaduna State Governor. I saw him on the screen a while ago. That's right, he's back on the screen. Your Excellency, we were talking about, say, we are not at ground zero. You have a number of funding mechanisms already for education. We are used to special intervention funds in Nigeria. And the question I asked the Honorable Minister is, look, can we, for instance, tweak aspects of UBEC, which requires counterpart funding, so that the states would then also provide their counterpart funding and direct it for the specific purposes under the Safe School Initiative? It appears, if I got him correctly, that his idea is, okay, UBEC can't come in, but it should be under the umbrella of the Safe School financing arrangements under the Ministry of Finance. Now, one hazard with that, and this is one of the implementation challenges that we face in the country, is it may not very well be that Safe School Initiative will have its own bureaucracy, and it would like to have a signature on the projects that it decides to undertake. So it doesn't want Safe School Initiative, you have a stamp. You go elsewhere, you have a stamp. Then your Ministry of Education, your SUBEB, will have a stamp. And then you have all kinds of things. We have seen it, for instance, with electrification projects in rural areas. A local government will say they are doing one. NDDC say they are doing one. Federal government, rural electrification agency say in the same location. In the end, nobody gets light. How do we get around this, or how can we maximize the current opportunities that we have? Your Excellency.
Well, the minister has explained one of the problems of UBEC. The law specifically requires counterpart funding. You put up an amount and the federal government matches that amount. So the condition precedent for drawing on UBEC funds is that you put up your counterpart funding. And many states are in arrears for some years. They have not put up the funding. So there is a lot of money there in UBEC that is idle. The Governors Forum has been pushing for converting the UBEC funding to something like a program for results, tied to specific targets. You get the money when you achieve certain targets. That will require an amendment to the law. We have to operate within the law or amend it. However, I think what you're proposing, which is to take some of the idle funds in UBEC and put it in a basket of funds for financing safe schools, I think is something that can be explored. We have to look at the law and see whether that is possible to do that, but I think it's something that can be explored. I think there is room for greater collaboration and reduction of duplication of effort in this area. And since the beginning of these abductions and kidnapping, this has become a national emergency. And I think in situations of national emergencies, we should have room for some flexibility. I'm sure if some funding from UBEC can kickstart that trust fund that my brother Aswe Igodalo spoke about, with private sector, board of trustees and partners overseeing the disbursement of the funds for approved projects, I think it will work. I think if the government puts in something, the private sector can come in, and international donors can also come in and create a basket of funds to finance safe schools. I think UBEC can play a role, but again, the devil is in the details of the law. The UBEC law needs to be looked at to give it more flexibility to do that. But definitely it's something worth exploring. And I think many of my colleagues in the Governors Forum are likely to support something like that, particularly for the Northwest, Northeast, and North Central, where this problem of safe schools has become a crisis and an emergency.
All right, we have to pause with the Governor of Kaduna State, Nasir El-Rufai, to return to the studio and ask Yodalo what should be your final contribution this morning. You suggested the issue of having a central body that could be constituted for the purpose of raising funds, for the financing of this. Who should constitute this central body you're talking about? Is it government agencies or private individuals or who?
Governor Rufai has actually answered that question in his response, but let me just go back. Basically, I think the key is trust. And I think a combination of those who are bringing the money, the private sector, NGOs, donors, the government itself, even the security agencies, all those that have an input and a part to play in determining how to look at this issue of safe schools. So the important thing is to have a structure that is trusted and have a mechanism. We have rules and regulations by which the trust works, which is clear and unambiguous, so that there's no room for any opaqueness. That's the key. So for me, it's a combination of different parties, not just the private sector. And like I said, if you look at the trust fund, the Security Trust Fund in Lagos or Edo State, it's a combination, but it's to have a transparent process. That's the key thing. And, the governor of Kaduna State also was talking about, and I think the Honorable Minister mentioned it, to the issue of the emergency situation we're in. It's great that the Minister of Finance is convening this, because in the private sector, when you look long-term, we don't have kids in schools, we don't have quality education, parents don't let them go to school, then what happens to the skill sets? Who goes into the employment? Who goes into the job sector? How do we employ the people for the jobs that are created? So we have a major national emergency. And, human capital is the greatest component of wealth creation in any country. If we don't deal with this issue of our children going to school, then Nigeria is in big trouble, because our developmental rate will contract very seriously. And if you look down 5-10 years, we already have a problem with education now. Then COVID came on, and then we have this issue of insecurity. So we have a triple whammy. In a situation of a triple whammy, we are headed to contraction and negative development and recession, both in the medium and long term. So we need to deal with this issue. And as one last thing, I think we also, maybe because I was mentioning that to the Chief of Defense Staff when we met on Tuesday, and it's something that it's coming from what some of the governors had said, we need to develop a special force for keeping schools safe. The security agencies have to look at this. Governor Kaduna said something about 30 minutes from each installation, or installations, or military responses, being able to get to where there are problems in 30 minutes. We need to develop a special force for this because of the emergency nature of this. We need to devote, and I mentioned this to the Chief of Defense Staff, and it's something we need to look at, working with technology, working with the private sector. Drones, Mrs. Uwais talked about chips in students. We need to bring everything on board to deal with this national emergency and national problem. I think after insecurity, or at par with insecurity, is this issue of education, making sure we have children in school, making sure that our 13 million out-of-school children come back into school. So it's a fundamental emergency. All hands must be on deck to deal with it, so...
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Igodalo. Mrs. Miriam Uwais, I'll ask you this question, but I would also have loved to ask the Minister of State and Governor Rufai the same question. So let's take a first shot at it. Well, when we have an emergency and funds are available and there are projects to be handled, it becomes sometimes, from our national experience, it becomes a contract bazaar. Schools are going to be fenced. You are going to have contractors who are supplying sand, who are supplying sharp sand, plaster sand, blocks, and cement priced at 4,000 naira a bag now, and so on and so forth. So everybody just gets in there. Some persons would argue, oh, you are creating jobs. But Mr. Godalo also talks about skill set. And I recall on Good Morning Nigeria, when we were discussing the kidnap incident in one of the schools, the school had virtually no fence, and it was a science secondary school, government science secondary school. Will it also not be valuable to begin to get some of this hands-on experience, to get some of the students to participate in these activities? Tai Sholari did it at Mayflower in the Kenya. Can we adopt that now? So that by the time the student is leaving school, if it is to set a block, you can do that. How many coaches do you need for a fence? What are your thoughts?
Well, the issue about vocational training and a lot of these skill sets is something that we're trying to focus on, because somehow there's been a depreciation in skill sets across the country. We have many youth and many children that are out of school and have no skills. So one of the things we're doing in our office is to drive what we call the At-Risk Children project. We're engaging states directly to see how we can get them to focus on, set up teams within the state to see how they can engage youth and children who are not in school, to try and encourage them to either go back into school or to share learnings about vocations, agriculture, creativity, to do so much, share learning in a period of 9 months and then exit them and encourage them to work together in clusters or in cooperatives to see that they actually benefit from what they are learning. And a lot of the development partners have engaged, have shown interest and are supporting the ARC-P project to see how, even beyond the issues of the Safe Schools initiative, we have too many youth out there that have nothing to do and who are very easy to call in, to someone to be part of the disruptions and the violence and even the issues of substance abuse. How can we have a concerted focus on these children? So what we're doing is engaging the states. So far we've been to about 5 states. Now we conduct scoping missions to engage the state itself to see what they have on ground, the facilities, the numbers that they have, the stakeholders who are already involved in this, all in a bid to enhance or add value to what the state is doing. And it's very interesting to see how the states themselves are embracing this. And they come up with all kinds of, ideas themselves, because these issues must be driven by the state. It must be state-led because the states themselves have the mandate for children, for primary health care, for empowerment. The federal government can only support what the state is doing. And it's very important for us. In one of the states, they've told us we have a database of undergraduates or graduates who don't have work. We want them to be trained on security as forest rangers. And so even though we don't have the skills in our own office, we have a very lean team. What we're doing is summoning the different skill providers from government and from the international community to see how we can engage these children and ensure that they learn. And we're also looking at sports, developing life skills, civics. There's so much to be done in this country, irrespective of the fact that we actually have these emerging problems. So it's important to keep an eye on everything that's happening rather than just focus on one or two things. And I think it's critical for us to work together as an inclusive set of society so that we can bring everybody's energy into one space and focus on seeing how we can really get our youth and our children into schools, or at least into productive ventures.
Thank you, Madam. Governor El-Rufai, you could also come in here. We're talking about, should I call it the vocational education, for instance, where students or pupils are, given the opportunity of learning one skill or the other while in school. Is that a possibility?
Sorry, I didn't get that. Can you repeat? I didn't quite hear you.
Oh, all right. We're talking about engaging students, for instance, in some vocational skills, that they could acquire while in school, so that when they leave school, they could have skills, to sustain them, before perhaps they get into higher school or something. The idea here is to ensure that the students get skills while in school. Is it a possibility in all the schools, in your state, for instance?
Of course, it is a possibility. In fact, the Kaduna State government just approved a new education policy that requires every student that passes through our school system up to secondary school to have, in addition to his WAEC and NECO certificate, 1 or 2 skills, just to supplement. Because in today's world, education alone without skills is probably inadequate. This is what we see very clearly going around in the world, particularly digital skills. So it's part of our education policy. And it is possible. And in fact, in Kaduna State, we have schools that the students produce their own furniture, the technical schools. We have some technical schools that have the carpentry equipment and laboratories and so on, and they produce this. But it is not in every school that you have teachers that can teach bricklaying, that can teach carpentry, and so on and so forth. It's not in every school. So yes, it is possible to do it, particularly in the technical schools. It is also possible to add this to the curriculum, as we have decided to do in Kaduna State. In every one of our secondary schools, we are going to add some kind of skills. For the girls, we are going to add skills like, fashion design and hairdressing and so on and so forth, so that they can at least have something to do in addition to their certificate. So it is possible, and it can be planned and implemented, but it cannot be done across the board. The suggestion by one of your uncles that, like Mayflower School, we build a fence and so on, may not work, because in some schools there are no such instructors to teach bricklaying and so on and so forth. But yes, it is possible. It can be explored. It's not difficult to work on. And over time, I think it may even have accrued benefits, not only to the society, but to the students and to the school.
Okay, Your Excellency, thank you very much. On that last point, you were saying that you don't have, there may be no qualified instructors for that. The trick will be employ them, and I'm sure they will deliver. I'm sure you can organize interviews for them, such as we saw recently you were organizing screening sessions for aspirant chairmen to local governments in your state. We'd like to appreciate you, Governor Nasir El-Rufai of Kaduna State, for your contribution to our conversation this morning on the Safe School Initiative. Have a lovely weekend.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, and here with us in the studios, our deep appreciation also to Mr. Aswe Ihodalo, who is chairman of NESG, as the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. He also chairs the board of Sterling Bank and a director of the Sovereign Investment Authority. Thanks a lot for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed being with you, Kingsley and Kieran. Thank you so much.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. And our appreciation also to Mrs. Miriam Uwe, Special Advisor to the President on Social Investment. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And our deep thanks to Dr. Chukwuemeka Nwajuba, the Honorable Minister of State for Education. Thanks a lot for being on Good Morning Nigeria again.
Thank you very much. NTA, I'm not a doctor. I'm a PhD holder. I don't ask the doctor. So
no, that's Doctor of Philosophy. I'm not saying you're a physician. He has a doctorate in law from the University of Jos. All right. We also would like to thank the governor of Sokoto State. Unfortunately, we couldn't have him for a long time. Aminu Waziri Tambuwal. He was with us via Zoom from Sokoto. Thanks a lot for your time and for participating. Best wishes. So that's it for us today, and indeed for the week on Good Morning Nigeria. We're back on Monday, same time, 7 o'clock in the morning. Until then, do enjoy your weekend. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kieran Umayo. Have a great weekend.